Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the mind-body connection, which entails things like trauma and pain. So on this first slide here, what you'll see is a framework, and this framework is called the Biopsychosocial model, and that is a mouthful. But the biggest takeaway here is that biological factors, psychological factors, and sociological factors all interact on multiple simultaneous levels to affect our well-being. And many of you probably understand this. Many of you have probably lived with this. Is just tying it all together with the framework. So, for example, take multiple sclerosis and pain. Some people experience neuropathic pain or nerve pain, and this is from a biological process, demyelination or inflammation. But as you know, pain is a negative thing and it makes us feel negative and think negative. So, this biological thing, pain related to the neurological process, is going to impact our psychology, our mood, possibly, our cognition, difficulty paying attention because the pain is calling our name. We might feel irritable, we might feel afraid or sad. And when we feel those things, it affects how we move in our social arena. So, we may pull away from family or friends or be more irritable with family and friends. When we're having a change in mood, it may affect our sleeping pattern. And as you know, when our sleep is disrupted or our diet's impacted because of our mood or stress, that's going to make our symptoms of multiple sclerosis worse, right? That when you're not sleeping properly, any biological symptoms might be exacerbated in the context of fatigue. So try to keep this framework in mind as we have our discussion and talk about some of these factors like pain and trauma throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So what is pain? Many of you probably can describe it if that's been your experience, but I'm going to speak to it in more of a biopsychosocial framework. So nociception is what is happening at the biological level. So maybe some pain receptor in your body has been impacted or modified by a physical trauma or condition, right? But in this model, we call it an onion model because it kind of looks like an onion and it has different layers. Pain, when we speak of pain, we're talking about the sensation. So nociception can cause different sensations: burning, throbbing, shooting. You can probably think of more. Suffering, another part of this onion model, is how the pain disrupts our life, how it affects our mood, how it affects our quality of life, our activity, the grief and loss that comes with pain. We're unable to maybe participate in meaningful activities the way that we used to, like work or like maybe, hobbies with your family or your friends. Pain behavior is how we respond to pain. So a pain behavior could be, I feel pain and I'm just going to go to sleep or sit down. I feel pain and maybe it's causing me to disrupt my life by going to the doctor more, right? So all of these things make up the experience of pain, right? It has all of these layers and it's multifaceted. And even though this is a representation that shows different sizes, we know that these circles that make up this onion model can move and change and look differently. So for example, we can have a big injury or big nerve damage, and the pain sensation might not equate to that. Think about when we're in a really scary situation, like, in the news when the mom is prying a kid from the alligator's mouth and she's clearly bitten and injured from the alligator, but she probably doesn't feel a thing in that moment. So nociception is huge, right? It's hugely impacted, but their pain sensation is small. Or think about maybe if you get a paper cut, right? Little damage, but it hurts like a whole lot. So again, this model is just sort of a catalyst to help us think about pain as being multifaceted and really impacting that biological sphere, that psychological sphere, and also that social sphere. Next slide, please. Trauma is the same way, right? There's a theme here that everything we talk about, we can look at it through different lenses that make up that biopsychosocial sphere. Trauma is also multifaceted. You can have emotional trauma, right? It can be acute, meaning lasting for a short amount of time directly after something that has threatened your physical or mental integrity has happened. It can be more long term or chronic, ebbing and flowing over time, or complex, right? Or trauma, we can be referring to physical trauma, some serious bodily harm. Either way, when we experience emotional or physical trauma, that permeates into our social life, that obviously has a biological component. And we'll talk about some of these pathways in more detail in the next slide. But again, this is more complex than just one facet of, psychology or biology. Next slide, please. So I'm going to break down these pathways a little bit. And again, keep that biopsychosocial model and frame. And this is presented as categorical. So I'm going to talk about this the way it is here on the slide. But remember, these things are interdependent, and they affect each other, exacerbate one another, and can even mitigate one another. And the reason this is important, the reason understanding that these pathways exist is because it really does allow many opportunities to think about different interventions, different ways that we manage it, right? If pain is multi-layered, then just taking medication might not help. We also have to think about the social part. What can we do to help improve our social well-being? The psychological part, right? So keep that framework in mind. So how are trauma and pain related? Well, one, both of these are stressors. And when our body is stressed, it responds with an autonomic nervous system response. So there's literally like a fire alarm going off in our bodies, getting us prepared to fight or flight when we are perceiving danger or stress. And this response comes with bodily tension. Bodily tension makes pain worse because now you have more tension pressing on your bones and your nerves, and making you just stiff and uncomfortable, affecting your activity and your movement. It also comes with hyperarousal, right, for some people. So by hyperarousal, I mean literally feeling restless, feeling adrenaline, feeling alert, paying more attention to your problems and your distress, but also hyper aroused throughout your day. Maybe you can't get to sleep, right? And we know that sleep is important, or else it just sort of has a domino effect and affects those other areas of our life. Trauma and pain both set off this alarm in our body to activate this hyper arousal and this tension. Trauma and pain also affect our cognition. So usually when we have a stressor like trauma or pain, by design, we're going to think about it over and over and over, right? We're problem solvers by nature. We're designed to try to survive. So if our attention is on the problem, right? If I'm thinking about my pain and thinking about my trauma, it's going to make my mood worse. It's going to set that alarm off to make my body think that I'm really in harm's way and make me more tense and hyper aroused. Also, when we have trauma and pain, our thoughts associated with those things are usually negative. When we're in pain, it's very difficult to think about rainbows and roses. We're thinking about, will this pain go away? Look what this pain has robbed me of. Same thing with trauma. When we think about trauma, it sort of spirals us into negative thinking, and that negative thinking is associated with negative mood usually. So feeling chronically worried, feeling intense sadness, feeling helpless, feeling frustrated, as well as our behavior, right? When we have this response to trauma and pain, because our resources are going to keeping that alarm on to make us fight or flight, our appetite changes. We may not eat our healthy diet that we usually engage in. Our activity may change. We may disengage. Our sleep may be disrupted. We even may be more prone to maladaptive coping strategies, right? Drinking more, smoking more. And so really, You can't think about pain and trauma in isolation. You have to think about how they're related to your biological, psychological, and social functioning so you can really come up with the best way to cope. Next slide, please. So, coping is no right or wrong way to cope, right? Everyone has different coping strategies. Obviously, the wrong way to cope, let me backstep there, is if your coping strategy is leading to more problems like substance use, right? However, as far as self-care and adaptive coping, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Do something that fills you up, that's meaningful, that gives you a break, that you can put pain and trauma in the background. And this, again, is going to be very person dependent. And I hope we can have some of this discussion in just a few moments. But some of the common ones are relaxation strategies. That's meditation, mindfulness, prayer, visualization exercises. But that's not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. Some people choose to do something more energizing or something that recharges them in the form of an activity that incorporates their values. So this could be reading, this could be exercise, but also making sure to pace and balance rest and activity. This can be tapping into social support. And obviously, having a self care routine. And when we think of self care, we usually think of task of daily living. Make sure I sleep well and make sure I bathe today. And that stuff is important. But when I'm referring to self-care, I want you to think more broadly. Think about what can I do for me that makes me feel filled up, that makes me feel meaningful and purposeful.